Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Falcor's Mighty Adventures. I'm eating one of these, you know those candies for your throat? This one has antibiotics in it and it's pretty good. So sorry if my voice is kind of different now, but I have to because I measured my temperature just now, like maybe half an hour ago, and it was 37.6 Celsius, which is technically sub-fever temperature. It's not a good sign. Yesterday already, my throat was aching. A few days ago, it was kind of scratchy, and I have to be super careful with these things because one of the main signs of infection or something wrong in your body is fever. And if I have a fever, I have to go to the hospital. So I'm gonna measure my temperature one more time in the middle of this video, just to be sure, and hopefully it'll be going down or at least remaining static at 37.6. Hopefully it's nothing serious. I'm pretty sure it's a common cold. I'm almost 100% sure because when I was let go from the hospital just a month ago, the first week I had something very similar with very similar symptoms, and in fact there are other symptoms that I'm starting to feel like a reaction on my skin, which is, it's sort of like I feel like this area here is irritated, and last time I felt this I had temperature, but I never got to having a fever. So hopefully that's the case. I'm gonna have to be wearing my mom's scarf to keep it nice and keep my throat nice and warm, and I have to be very careful with temperature in general. I have to keep an eye out for different signs. I'm feeling pretty good. I do feel heat emanating from my body, but I'm not getting any shivers or anything like that. Like, one of the main things you have to look out for is if you're getting shivers, like heavy fever shivers. And luckily I don't have any shivers, so that's good. That's a really good sign. So anyway, today we're going to talk about my treatment. We're going to go back to talking about that because ultimately this series is about that. And although I thought it was a good idea to take a break from the subject, I want to still keep it focused. So from time to time I'm going to change subject. Ooh, that's pretty cool. We're going to increase strength just for that. Yeah, it's way better. Oh, that's really nice, and it's a mace. So yeah, we're gonna talk about the treatment and how we continued. So basically, this is what happened. Many things happened the first few days. I'd say the first 2 weeks. Many things. I talked to different specialists, and I'm gonna tell you all about it right now. Basically, they did a CAT scan of my entire body, and they noticed that my lungs were infected. So going back, as a summary, I get diagnosed, I get the results back, and they tell me, yes, it's leukemia. We still have to wait even more time to find out what kind of leukemia you have. If it's what's called high risk, if you're a high risk leukemia patient or a low risk leukemia patient. They had to find out if I was Philadelphia positive or negative, which turned out to be negative, and they would know what kind of, if I was high risk or low risk, depending on how I responded to the first few treatments of chemo. But that comes a little later. For now, they were still doing tests on my body. They did a CAT scan. Everything seemed fine, but they did notice that my lungs were completely covered in some kind of infection. And this is no surprise because I had no immune system. I had no idea, but there was no immune system. There were no white blood cells defending my body, so of course I was going to get infected with something. And yeah, they discovered there's something in your lungs, like your entire pulmonary system is compromised. So they did a second CAT scan, which is called a high contrast CAT scan, where Basically, they inject your veins with an iodine solution that sort of highlights areas that are infected within your body. So in the new CAT scan, they could see very clearly if I was really infected or it's something else, something superficial, like maybe some kind of layer of something on my lungs, but it's nothing serious. Turned out it was something, an infection. So what they had to do was something called an emergency pulmonary endoscopy. I'm not sure how you say that in English. Endoscopia in Spanish. Basically, what happens is they send a team of doctors that specialize in lungs, respiratory doctors, pulmonary doctors. They send you a team of those to your bed, and then they tell you, listen, this is what we're going to do. And this is what they did. There's two ways of doing this. You can get, you can basically give the guy, put the guy to sleep, or the patient to sleep, and you do this when you're sleeping, or you can do this while you're completely aware and awake. I chose to do it awake because I didn't want problems. So I'm like, let's do the brave thing. Let's be brave and do this while I'm awake. And basically what they do is they grab a tube which has a tiny little camera and a little light on the tip. And this tube you can manipulate from the other side of the tube. So you can sort of bend it the way you want while it's in anywhere in like any sort of cavity or anything like that. So what they do is they add a local anesthetic to your nostrils so you don't feel anything, and it also adds as a lubricant. And then they grab this really long tube and they sort of go down through your nasal cavity, nasal ducts, I think they're called, down into your lungs, not into your stomach, not down the esophagus, into the lungs. So they say, like they're pushing the thing down, and it's uncomfortable, of course. It's super uncomfortable at first. They push the tube down into your larynx, I suppose, or pharynx. I'm not sure. And they tell you to say like ah, like this, go ah. And when you're going like that, when you say ah, they sort of stab it through your vocal cords. And once they're in the lungs, what they do is they have 2 or 3 jobs that they have to do. They have to observe, which is number 1, to visual contact of what's going on in your lungs. Then they have to find. Ooh, this is really good. This is something really sought after. They check your lungs to see what's the damage. Then they spray the inside of your lungs with a liquid that then helps absorb whatever, like a sample of whatever is infecting your lungs. So in my case, they took a sample from all parts of my lungs, the left lung, the right lung, up, down, left, right, everything. They took several samples. It was pretty uncomfortable, not in the lungs, but in this area here. This is I don't know if you can see it. It's sort of where the lungs start, just under your throat. That's the most uncomfortable area. And so they took samples. One of the doctors held my hand. That really helped. And she's like, don't worry. Just try not to cough. That's the only thing that could screw us up. And please, don't pull the tube out, because they said that some people freak out and they pull the tube out completely, and that can harm your lungs. So you could, the inner layer of the lungs is very, very supple. It's very delicate, and you can absolutely permanently ruin your lungs if you did something like that. So she's like, please don't pull it out. Try to keep it together. And luckily, I did. We kept it together. By the end of the operation, it wasn't that hard anymore. The doctor had very fine motor skills, and he was really good. He made sure that I didn't feel that much. So yeah, they pull out the tube, and I start coughing blood, and I'm like, damn, I'm sorry, what's happening? And they're like, it's normal. That's just a little bit of damage in your throat, but you're gonna feel completely you're going to feel completely fine by tomorrow. And I did. For a while, I lost my voice for a little bit. It's really good. I lost my voice for a little bit, but all in all, I felt fine. Now, they had the samples, and the thing was, we have to find out what the hell is infecting you. And that took another 2 days. 2 days of testing. And in those 2 days, of course, I met oof, crap, I died already. In those 2 days, I met other specialists. Many things, as I said, many things happen at the same time. So in this, while we were waiting, of course, I was doing other things. But basically, just to finish the topic of my lungs, the results came back, and luckily it was rhinovirus. Now, for those who don't know, rhinovirus, I believe, is a common cold or something similar. It's something very easily treatable. So the doctors later told me, like months later, they're like, most likely if that were something else and you didn't have an immune system and we didn't have the right antibiotics or the right treatment, that would have easily been the cause of death. So again, I'm just a lucky guy. I got, of all the things that I could have gotten, I got rhinovirus. So I traveled on public transportation. I spent time outside in the mud and the dirt. I shook hands with people. I manipulated money with my hands. All of these things somehow didn't lead to something more serious than rhinovirus. So again, I'm just a really, really fortunate guy. So yeah, luckily they gave me some antibiotics. No, not antibiotics, because it's a virus. They gave me something that helped me, basically, and within a few days, the problem was completely minimized. So, so that was that. And then, as I said, other specialists started to introduce themselves to me, because you don't just have a team of hematologists, you have a team of infectologists, you've got dermatologists, you've got urologists. Basically every part of your body that you can think of, you've got a specialist that's there when you need him or her. They say it's 24/7, like you can call any of them anytime, but that's not true. I don't think there's a world where that's true. So anyway, let me just tell you a quick story of this psychologist. So I was just laying in my bed, just minding my own business, and the door swings open, and this woman walks in with like 30 kilos of protective gear on her, of like, let's say aprons and sort of medical protection gear, like a face mask and things like that. She walks in and she's like, "Don't be alarmed." I'm like, "Hello, how can I help you?" And she's like, "Don't be alarmed. You see," with this weird witch voice, she's like, "You see, I am your psychiatrist." And I'm like, "Gee," and she's like, "I'm also your psychologist." And I'm like, and she's like, "And if you let me, I'll be your friend." And I'm like, "Okay, first of all, what's your name?" And she says, "My name is so and so." And she's like, before I can even say anything, she just walks up like she's giving a lecture in a university. She walks up to my window, and she, with her hands behind her back, she's like, "Cancer is a terrible disease." And I'm like, "Yes, it is." And she's like, "We have no cure for it, I'm like, "No, I know." And she's like, "And we don't know the exact cause either." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I know, I've heard all of this." And she's like, "But there are ways around it." And I'm like, "Okay, good. Like, I've been told all of this. Thank you very much." And she's like, she just looks at me like really weirdly, and she's like, "As your psychiatrist, I am permitted to allow you certain help." And I'm like, "Good." And she's like, certain help that other people might not receive. One of them is certain kinds of drugs that will help you out. And I'm like, what kinds of drugs? And she's like, if you're having trouble sleeping, I can give you anti-anxiety pills. And I'm like, very nice, okay. And she's like, if you're having trouble, what did she say? If you're having trouble with depression, I can prescribe antidepressants. And I'm like, okay, I don't have trouble with this. And she's like, you will. And I'm like, gee, that's very nice to hear. Thank you very much. And then she's like, you see, everyone in life has problems. Did you know? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, I want you to open up to me, to let me in. I'm like, it might take some time to gain that trust. And she's like, hopefully it won't take too long. And then she left. She fucked off just like that. And you know what? You know what happened the next day? Another psychologist comes in, who comes in, and she's like, hi, hey, you wanna talk? And I'm like, who are you? She's like, I'm your psychologist. And she was a completely different person. And I'm like, but I already have a psychologist, Miss So-and-so. And she's like, what? I'm like, yeah. She walked in yesterday and told me. And she walked in with like all this gear and everything. And she's like, that's not your psychologist. I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, I don't know. I know the person you're talking about, but that's not your psychologist. I'm your psychologist. My name is so-and-so, and I'm here to help you with whatever you need. And I'm like, first of all, she seems so much more, relatable, because the other one seemed like a mad scientist, when she's like, don't be alarmed. And she even said like, this is for your protection, not mine. Like, it just seemed, kind of out of place. And so this new psychologist was like, basically, you can call me anytime, and if anything happens, if you feel like you need any help at all, I can help you out. And she did say that, I can offer you medication for your mind if you're feeling, so and so. I'm like, yeah, I've been told. She's like, you're free to ask for anything you want, like, because of your situation. And that felt really good. But I've never been a fan of medication for the mind. So the most I've ever asked for is sleeping pills, and I only ever used them maybe 2 weeks in total, like considering the whole treatment. What I did end up using later on is Benadryl. Benadryl is a drug. It's an antihistamine drug. And what this drug does is, it first of all, it's used more than anything to prevent allergic reactions. That's why it's an antihistamine. But I used it because it has a secondary effect, which is it makes you sleepy. So I realized that Benadryl wasn't as aggressive as the other drug that they gave me, which is clonazepam. I'm not sure what the name is in English. But I realized that Benadryl was much more like sort of lighter, and I didn't really need that strong of a drug. But that comes later. I have a whole Benadryl phase while I was in the hospital. These things, by the way, here, they're just Easter eggs. I don't really pay attention to them. I think some people collect them, but yeah. Oh, by the way, I'm gonna just check really quick my temperature. If it goes up, I'm gonna have to take a break because I'm gonna have to go to the hospital. If it reaches 38 degrees, I have to go to the hospital technically, unless the doctor's like, oh, we can give it like a day and see how you progress. But generally speaking, I should be going to the hospital if I reach 38. We're gonna sell some stuff here. This we're not gonna sell because it's a rare, kind of like a rare. But everything else that's green and yellow, we sell. We don't have much money, but we don't need much money either. And we have 70 health potions, so we're good. We're gonna do maybe one more or two more of these rebirth fountains, just just to see. As you can see, we're progressing much faster. That's because we've got better gear. That mace, for example, is very nice. So yeah, basically that happened. I also talked to a urologist who was this huge black guy who walks into my room. He was from Brazil, I think. And I just remember how big and tall he was. And he could barely fit through the through the door. He walks in and he's like, "Hello, I'm your urologist." And I'm like, cool. Oh crap, let's see. 37.6. It didn't go up, it didn't go down. And he walks in and he's like, "Listen, because of the treatment that you're gonna have, you have to, or we recommend, highly recommend, that you give a sperm sample, which we can freeze, in case there's permanent damage to your reproductive system. So like the hormonal part, the testicles and things like that. That's one of the things about cancer treatment. The radiation and sometimes the chemo can affect that. It's not always the case, but just to be sure. So yeah, he's like, you gotta give a sperm sample, and we're not gonna start chemo until the urology department or whatever, the reproductive health department, gives us the okay that the sperm sample is good and fertile, and it's a safe alternative in case something happens. And I'm like, sure. I got super nervous. I admit this scared the crap out of me, because you're faced with like a huge decision. Not just a decision. You're faced with something that could be permanent, and it has to do with having children, and I've always wanted to have children. So I was kind of scared when they told me that. But the urologist really calmed me down, and he's like, "Listen, like we've never had trouble with this, and the technology nowadays has advanced so fast, and really you don't need to worry about this at all. I don't want you worrying about this. Just give it a sample, and we're gonna see how we progress." And he's like, "No funny business, okay? You do what you have to do by yourself. No funny business." Okay, and just put the sample in the frickin' thing, and that's it. And just give it into the to the Department of Sexual Health or whatever, and done. And I'm like, okay, cool. I gave the sperm sample, and they said it was fine, it was perfect, and that's when we began planning the chemotherapy. Now, thing about chemo. First of all, it's kind of disgusting. I still think about it like as a disgusting thing, but if objectively speaking, it's not that bad. I still feel a kind of physical rejection to the thought of chemo because I went through a lot of it, and I went through pretty strong chemo. But there are different kinds of chemo, and not everyone needs to go through what I had to go through, because from what I understand, if you've got another kind of cancer, like let's say a tumor, it's much more localized. So you don't need to do something that's full body, like me, which was leukemia. Like you've got bone marrow in all your body, basically, in all your bones. So I had to do a more systemic chemotherapy that affected my whole body. And then later on, I had the radiation treatment, again, my whole body, not localized, not focused. So what I'm trying to say is I had a certain kind of chemo that was pretty strong. Now, everyone, or at least most people, including me, I thought chemo was one of those things where, you start chemo and already, let's say day one, you're feeling like crap and you gotta puke and things like that. And the truth is, in my experience, I didn't feel any effect until maybe day 4 or 5. And the only effect I felt was sort of, I describe it as a hangover, like a very strong hangover where you don't want to do anything and you kind of don't want to eat. You still kind of eat. Certain things don't gross you out, but other things really do gross you out. Like I admit, I started getting cravings for certain foods, and I started getting grossed out by other foods. Like for example, anything that had egg in it, like an egg souffle, let's say, something made with eggs, grossed me out. Like just the smell of it, I got sick. I got sick of it. It ruined my appetite. Like I'd get nausea and things like that. But in general, speaking in general, I didn't really feel that much. You feel really tired and fatigued. It's hard to pay attention to things. Sometimes people talk to you and you don't have the strength to really pay attention. And you've got good days and bad days. For example, with me, in my case, they gave me 2 rounds of chemo every day, 6 days a week, and then they gave me 1 day of like rest. And the day after the day with rest, I actually felt much better. Like you recuperate pretty quickly at first. The thing is, over time, because I think the first time that I was in the hospital with the chemotherapy, I was there for maybe a month and a half or 2. And over time, I admit there is a sort of cumulative effect, and that was the case with me. At first, I was holding out pretty strong. I didn't feel too much nausea. It was very tolerable. The doctors give you anything you want. So if you're feeling nausea, they say no problem. We'll give you drugs for that. If even with the drugs you feel nausea, they give you extra drugs for that. They give you injections and things like that. We still have a few minutes, so I will say one thing though. Before they started the chemo, they told me we can't just inject chemo into your arm, because until then all the medication I was getting was through something called lateral lines, which I think it's lateral, or it's basically when they inject things into the veins in your arms, for example, like like on your elbow. Well, they can't give you chemo in your elbow because it's a very powerful drug. It's basically a poison, and it will ruin your arm. So what they had to do is a tiny little operation called a main line. Now, what's a main line? Main line is a tube that the doctors put into you. Usually, in my case, it was the neck. So it's a tube that goes down your neck through your. I'm not sure if it's the vena cava or the aorta, but it's one of the big blood vessels that lead straight to your heart, because what they want to do is inject the medication right where the pump of your body is, which is the heart, and they want it to be there because your heart tissue can handle the chemo. So they made a tiny operation. It didn't hurt at all. It was like less than 5 minutes. They put the tube down your neck, and all of the chemo was done through those. There were 2 channels sticking out of my neck. All of it was done there. And actually, we're gonna see if we can find. I'm gonna find some, because we have to finish the episode here. But basically, yeah, all of the chemo was done there. Crap, we don't have. Okay, yeah, we're gonna end. I'm gonna re-explore all of this later, but yeah. So yeah, that's it. Like, we're gonna end the episode with right where the chemo starts. But basically, they gave me the main line, and almost immediately the chemo started. They took the sperm sample and everything, and the chemo started, and that's where the real fight began. That's where the doctors were like, this is it. This is where the fight begins. So anyway, quick summary of all of that. I'm a bit worried now because of the temperature. So we're gonna see what happens. Hopefully I'll be okay. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. A like and a sub would be greatly appreciated. And thanks, guys. See you in the next one. Bye.